Well, thank you everyone for coming today to the second session of Road to Research, Meet the Researcher. We've got a great presenter for you here today, and he's actually part of our Road to Research, Meet the Researcher coordination team. If you participated in our first session on October 24th, you may remember him. But if not, you'll get the chance to meet him today. And his name is Saul Schaffer. Saul, if you would like to please advance the slide. Thank you. So yeah, Saul is a mechanical engineering PhD student, and we're going to learn all about his research. And just to touch on the agenda today, next slide, please. We're going to do some short introductions of our coordination team and then of our mentors. We're going to get to know Saul, learn about his research, do a 360 lab tour. And this is going to be a virtual lab tour of the lab that Saul works in. And it's also Dr. Vicki Webster-Wood's lab as well. And Dr. Webster-Wood is here with us today. Then we're going to dive into 3D printing and our activity. We'll break out into our breakout rooms to test our materials, and then we will have our conclusion. Oh, before I get started, you should have some materials with you today, and if you don't have them with you right away, that's okay. We'll have a 5-minute break before we go into our breakout rooms when you really need them. But those materials are going to be in that Ziploc bag that was in that yellow envelope that I had sent out to everyone. So it's going to be the 2 pieces of 3D printer filament, the orange one and the black one. And then you'll have your 3D printed base here. You will also have your 3 arms. And then you will have a couple of different materials. Additionally, you should have a 3D printed activity sheet that was downloadable from the Canvas site. So you should have all those in place after the break for our breakout sessions to begin. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Kristen Lavery. Most of you probably know who I am by now. I'm the assistant director of the Leonard Gelfand Center. I'm also the business manager. I've been with the center for almost 8 years, and my background is in elementary education. I enjoy DIY projects, dogs. I'm a big fan of my dog, Odin, and learning new things like 3D printing, which we're all going to learn more about today. And the next person on our coordination team is actually Dr. Vicki Webster-Wood. She's an assistant professor in mechanical engineering. Vicki, if you'd like to share your video, turn on your video and say a couple words about yourself.
Sure, happy to be here today. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, like Kristen said, I'm a assistant professor in mechanical engineering. Some fun things about me. My research lab houses 2 saltwater aquariums, and we keep our own sea slugs. And I enjoy playing trumpet, mountain dulcimer, and quilting. And because I'm a mechanical engineer, I got to throw in something mechanical engineering-y. When I was in high school, my first car came to me with the engine largely in a box. And I actually had to learn to repair it before I was allowed to drive, which was a lot of fun. So Saul, if you want to keep on going. I believe that now we're going to introduce our mentors. So mentors, if you want to go ahead and turn on your camera and say a quick hello, we can start with that. I guess I can call people in order so that we've coordinated a little. Purva, do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi, I'm Purva. I'm a 4th-year PhD student in mechanical engineering, and I love animals. I love to read about medicine, which sounds weird because I'm a mechanical engineer. And I love going outdoors on hikes and running.
Thanks. How about Emma?
Hi everyone, I'm Emma. I'm a third year mechanical engineering PhD student, and I've never built what we're building today before, but when I was in middle school, my sister and I built a trebuchet to fire marshmallows, so I'm very excited to do this again.
The superior siege engine. Thanks, Emma. How about Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca. Oh, I think my video paused. Okay, can you hear me?
Yep, you're good now.
I'm Rebecca. I'm a fifth year PhD student, also mechanical engineering. And I guess a fun fact about me is that I'm a group fitness instructor. So I teach gym classes when gym classes happen. So not anything recently.
Very cool. Next up looks like is Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm Joe. I'm a fifth year PhD student. I work on robots, specifically robots with legs. And recently, despite having been a dog person, recently got a cat. And I have to say, they're okay. And they're also much better at moving than my robots are. So that's both nice and frustrating.
Yep. Thanks, Joe. Terry, got you on my list next.
Hi, I'm Terry. I'm a second year PhD student in the Robotics Institute at CMU. I like being outdoors. When I was a kid, I tried 11 different sports. Over quarantine, I've rewatched all the Marvel movies in order and been trying to learn to knit, which is going okay.
Awesome. And I think that brings us to Julian. Do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, hi, I'm Julian. I'm a fifth year PhD student in mechanical engineering and robotics. I work on all kinds of different robots, especially modular robots where you can interchange different parts to make different types of robots quickly. And all my spare time has gone into my work recently, so I don't have any very interesting hobbies unlike this, but I like to sit and pet my guinea pigs in the morning and the evening, so that's my stress relief for the day after working.
Awesome. Thanks, Julian. And I think I have hit everyone. Chime in if I'm missing you. I'm scrolling through the list. Great. Okay, and you'll all get to meet our mentors in one-on-one breakout, well, in small group breakout rooms later in the session as well. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the mentors, please turn off your cameras again so we can conserve bandwidth. And we'll keep going.
Alrighty. Yeah, so hey everybody, my name's Saul. I'll be sort of leading this session today, talking about myself, who I was in middle school, who I am now, and then get to some 3D printing stuff and some 3D printing activities. Yeah. So getting to know me, are we doing this as a Q&A?
I was going to ask you questions, but you answered my questions before I asked them.
All right, go for it. Yeah, just kidding. Oh, ask me questions.
So yeah, Saul, do you want to tell us a little bit about where you grew up and kind of your path to Carnegie Mellon?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in New Orleans, which is that little dot down here in Louisiana. And then I went, that's where I was actually born in Dallas. And then I moved to New Orleans when I was 4. And then I went to, elementary through high school there. And then I moved up to the Washington area for college. And then I moved to CMU in Pittsburgh, and this is me in middle school. This is one of the oldest photos I have of myself that I took versus like people taking of me. And oh boy, it was hard to look at when I found it. I was like, yikes! But I think that's a lot of people when they look back at old photos. So it's good to share them.
Awesome. Do you have any favorite subjects in middle school?
Yeah. Oh boy, I had lots of favorite subjects. So in middle school, I really liked earth science. I loved learning about like the tectonic plates, and my mind was blown when I first learned that like tectonic plates sometimes like go under each other. I was like, but where does it go? And they're like, it just melts back into the earth. And I was like, that's wild. How does that happen? So that really was like the first time I was like, wow, this science thing, this is really cool. I want to learn more. But it wasn't just science. I was also really interested in high school in English literature. I loved reading Pride and Prejudice. I thought it was like a great book, and I loved like analyzing literature and learning about history, especially European history. Taking physics in high school was really fun. I had a really good time doing that. Yeah, those are my favorite classes for sure.
Were any of these subjects more challenging than others?
Yeah, I thought the physics class could be challenging at times, and especially the English literature class was really hard because it required a lot of writing, and I wasn't like a super strong writer at the time, and so I got my butt kicked into shape by my teacher, who forced us to do all these outlines, and it was sort of a trial by fire, but I felt like I learned a lot from the experience, and so it ended up being one of my favorite classes, even though I found it really hard.
Cool. I see you've got acting in bold there.
Yeah,
You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in elementary and middle school and a little bit of high school, I was really into doing theater, and so I was part of this theater program in my high school, which was an arts-based high school, and so I memorized monologues and did lots of breathing exercises and was I'm going to be an actor. And then I sort of looked at the success rate of people who want to be actors and people who become actors, and I was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to be an actor anymore. That's a really low probability. And so I started looking at other things. I started doing debate team. I was like, maybe I want to be a lawyer. This is really fun. I started taking more science classes, ooh, doctors heal people. That's really cool too. And then I learned about the robotics club, and I was like, whoa, robots, I love it. This is amazing. You can build machines that do things for you. That's pretty compelling. I'm quite lazy in middle school. I was like, I don't want to do work. I can make a machine do it. And so I loved sort of building things and working with other people. And I got really into doing robotics. And then Quiz Bowl was just for fun. Quiz Bowl was, it's like Jeopardy, but no stakes and no one wins money. So it's just a lot of fun answering trivia questions with friends and sort of goofing off.
And did those experiences impact your career trajectory and decision, you think?
Absolutely, yeah. So I had sort of no exposure to engineering except through these extracurricular activities like robotics, and so doing robotics as an after-school activity, I learned about what engineers do, and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. You get to build things and sort of work in interdisciplinary teams with people who have all sorts of different knowledge than you, and you get to learn from them. And I was like, oh, that seems like something I would want to do. And that is, I could sort of trace my choice of pursuing mechanical engineering in college to the experiences that I had on this robotics team. That sort of got me excited about engineering.
And when you first got to college, what did you think mechanical engineers do?
Yeah, so when I first got to college, I was like, mechanical engineers are people who, well, actually, when I first heard about it before I even got to college, I thought it was just people who worked on cars. I thought a mechanic and a mechanical engineer were the same thing. Turns out they're not. Mechanical engineers do a lot more stuff, much sort of different stuff. So mechanical engineers sort of can design any kind of structure that moves, and also lots of structures that don't move. So everything from a bottle, like a water bottle, to a computer mouse, to cars, to even some parts of bridges. That's sort of another kind of engineering. They sort of do a little bit of everything. And I was like, oh, I don't really know what I want to do when I graduate. So this major that sort of does a little bit of everything seems really compelling, because that means I don't have to decide what I want to do. So I studied mechanical engineering to not have to make a choice.
And how did you feel about those initial engineering courses?
Yeah, so I got to college and I was like, I did pretty well in physics in high school, and I was like, I can do this engineering thing. And then I had classes where I had lecture slides that looked like this, and I was like, oh boy, this is actually kind of hard. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Turns out this particular class I did really well in, but it's a very intimidating looking slide. So there was a lots of content where I just, especially in my first year, I was like, I don't know if I belong. Maybe I was just at an easy high school. A lot of these people seem to know all this stuff already. And so I really questioned, am I smart enough to do this? And it was through going to office hours, meeting with the other people who sort of run the class besides the teacher. Those people are called TAs, teaching assistants, and talking to friends that I was like, a lot of people find it really hard to begin with. And then through hard work and sort of being diligent about how you study, you can sort of get through it. And it's not really about being smart. It's sort of about, working hard and being sort of determined. And I was like, well, I can be that. I can work hard and I can be determined. And so I was, and I ended up doing well in my engineering classes from then on out.
And looking back, what did you kind of discover about these classes?
I discovered, so originally I'm taking these classes and I'm thinking, you know, the breadth of classes, the sort of range of material that's being covered. You know, I don't know if I want to do stuff with thermodynamics. I don't know if I want to do stuff just with statics. Like, why am I taking all these different classes? And now sort of as a graduate student and sort of actually even before that, moving later into my degree in my second or my third and fourth year, I realized that all these sort of fundamental classes that I didn't see how they fit together actually are very important to sort of understanding any like real system in the world. So you look at a car and you're like, all right, it's got wheels, it's got gasoline, it's got brakes. Now they've got computers. Wow, I felt really old saying now they've got computers in cars. You know, there's so many different things going on in these cars, and that it's really important to understand thermodynamics and mechanics and vibrations, and they all sort of tie together to help you build a better world, right? And that's sort of what mechanical engineers try to do. And so understanding that made it a lot easier to try to learn the content in the classes, because I started to see much later on that they all sort of fit together and were all really important.
And I would imagine that this slide looks a lot less confusing now.
Yeah, I get everything on this slide. Yeah.
It's very doable.
It's
Everybody
very
has those times when they feel like maybe they're not good enough for engineering, but
yeah, absolutely.
everybody is. You can always do it.
Very true. Very true. I completely agree with that.
Awesome. So when did you start thinking about graduate school?
Yeah, so that's a little premature. In my junior year of college, I was working. I had already been working in a lab, and I was talking to a professor whose lab I was working in, and we were sort of just having a general talk about like career goals and what I wanted to do. This person was more than just like a person that I worked in their lab. They were also sort of a mentor, which I found really important in sort of figuring out what I wanted to do in my life. Because, you know, at the time I was like 20 or something, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I didn't really know what it looked like to do different things, right? What it was like to get a job out of college or go to graduate school. And so by talking to people who had done some of these things, I sort of got to learn without having to without needing to have done those things myself. And so talking to my professor about graduate school as something that sort of allows you to dig deep, really deep into a subject and sort of learn more about it, and to sort of not only learn about it, but to like find out new things that like no one has ever known before, and then share it with other people as like the main goal of graduate study, and then to sort of train to be a better scientist. I was like, wow, that's really compelling. I want to develop that. You know, I really like teaching and I really like learning. And so this is like a great opportunity for me to sort of get to do both of those things. Yeah, and especially I really enjoyed doing research in his lab. And I was like, well, I want to do more of this research stuff. Science is great. So yeah, so that sort of led me to pursue graduate school.
And how did you decide on CMU and the B.O.R.G?
Yeah, so I decided on CMU and the B.O.R.G because some of the most consistent advice that I got from other people was to pick schools or to pick your graduate program based on your advisor. And actually, I had an interview with you, Vicky, and I was just really impressed by the work that was being done in the lab. And I thought the interview went really well. I thought we clicked. And so I felt like this was like a good opportunity, or a sort of a good match. I really liked the lab environment when I toured. And I know I wanted to do robotics, and CMU is just a really great place to do robotics graduate work. And so it seemed like a no-brainer. I was really excited to join, and so I sort of jumped at the opportunity.
And I didn't tell you to say any of that.
Yes, you did.
And what does B.O.R.G stand for, if you want to share?
So B.O.R.G stands for the Biohybrid and Organic Robotics Group. If any of you guys are Trekkies out there, which maybe there's one, then you might recognize this from Star Trek as one of the sort of villains in the series. And that's the inspiration for the acronym. Yeah.
I think I'm going to hand things back over to Kristen as you head into the next set of slides.
All right. Thank you, Vicky.
Thanks, Vicky.
It was great to hear all the things that you were involved in growing up, Saul. And I hope our viewers enjoyed it as well. So moving on here, let's get a little more into your research and what you're doing in the B.O.R.G lab.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So, but first, I guess we're going to do a poll.
We are. That's exactly right.
So let me
So-
do that.
Here comes the poll. Oh, there's another clip. There it is. Okay.
Okay, so our first poll for the session is, what are 3D printers used for today? I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll now. So our answers are A, making special metal parts for airplanes and fast cars. B, making detailed and cheap physical 3D models for artists and hobbyists. C, developing new medical treatments like hip implants and organ replacements. D, creating inexpensive housing for the homeless. And also E, low-cost prosthetic limbs.
You should note that you can actually select multiple choices. So maybe
Oh,
one
yeah.
choice is right, or maybe multiple.
So pick the answer or answers that you think are correct. So we have 15 out of 22 of our friends that have participated. So we'll wait for another couple responses here, and then I will end the polling. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end that now and share the results with everybody. So everybody chose B. And we sort of have scattered results for A, C, D, and E. So Saul, what are the correct answers?
Yeah, so all of these are uses of 3D printers today. Some of I like to see, it's cool to see that a lot of you selected, or that there's a lot of the answers were selected. I don't know if people were selecting all of the answers, but yeah, so 3D printers are used to make special metal parts for airplanes and fast cars, because you can make really, really strong, but still extraordinarily light products using metal 3D printers. As you guys all have in your hands, are 3D printed, or pretty detailed and pretty inexpensive 3D printed physical models from the sorts of printers used by sort of hobbyists and artists. But also researchers use this kind of printer as well. And then the rest of them, developing medical treatments and inexpensive housing and low-cost prosthetic limbs, we'll sort of talk about as the presentation goes on. But yeah, all of these things are sort of uses for 3D printers, and I think most people end up thinking that it's just sort of the option B.
Yeah, I think that is the general go-to for 3D printing at the moment. So we'll learn more about that and all the things that you can do with 3D printing throughout this session.
Absolutely. And we got another poll for you.
This one, yeah.
So here's some beautiful animations. Great. What kinds of materials can be 3D printed?
Okay. So I just launched our next poll. What kinds of materials can be 3D printed? And this one is multiple choice as well. Answer A is plastics. B is metals. C, biological materials. And D is food. It's like most.
And Saul, we've got a question in chat. Do you want to explain what ABS is, or what it stands for?
Yes, ABS is the chemical name for the same plastic it's a plastic that's used in Lego material. I think it stands for acrylo something butadiene. I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but it's the name of it's a long chemical name for just a material that happens to be the plastic that makes up Legos, and is also used sort of in lots of consumer products. So parts of your computer are probably made of ABS, some of the plastic parts. Parts of like speakers are probably made from ABS, just like lots of plastic parts that come on things that you buy. A lot of it is ABS, very common material.
It's true. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end polling. Share these results. So all of our participants this time chose the plastics, and then some of them chose the metals biological materials in the food. So what do we know about the materials, Saul?
Yeah, so actually you can print with all of these materials. It should be noted, one printer will very likely not do all of these different materials at the same time because it's sort of the way that it prints, that these materials have to be printed, is sort of calls for different kinds of printers. But all of these materials have been used in one form or another on one 3D printer or another as of like today, which is really exciting. And so we'll talk more about those sort of as this presentation continues, but I sort of want to get your brain whizzing and your gears turning about like, how would you even print part of an organ? Like food, you're printing chocolate? I don't believe you, Saul. You got to show me, and I will. So buckle up. Okay. So talking about, oopsie, hold up. Going to the next slide. Right. So talked about 3D printing organs, parts of organs, as well as cells. Beyond that, sort of before that, it was people have used 3D printers in order to sort of visualize anatomy, right? So the human body is so complex. And so when people are learning about it, it's really important, especially like doctors and surgeons. It's important that they not only sort of learn what different parts are called, but like where they physically are on a human being. And so you can 3D print these extraordinarily detailed and transparent models of people so that teachers can show on these models where different things are and what they're called. And really cool is you can use this same general method to plan out surgeries. So let's say someone has something that sort of is misshapen in their body. There's something sort of weird about how their heart grew. And so it's important to sort of have a surgical intervention to make a correction to that. If the surgeon has never seen that sort of deformation or that sort of like misshapenness in their heart, it's really useful for them to scan the heart first and then be able to sort of manipulate a 3D model of it, a physical 3D model, so they can plan out exactly how they want to tackle this surgical problem. This technique was used successfully to separate like a very sort of difficult case of conjoined twins in such a way that the surgeons claimed that if they didn't have these 3D printed models, not the ones I'm showing you, but sort of other ones, that the surgery, they don't think they would have been able to do the surgery successfully. And unfortunately, both of these twins, these conjoined twins, survived the surgery and are living today. The surgery happened like, I think about 8 years ago now. And so it's a really exciting technique because you can sort of plan out a surgery and sort of touch different parts of figure out where you're going to go and what you're going to do before you even start the surgery, which is really great for surgeons. Another really exciting thing you can do with 3D printing is create these really low cost, rapidly built homes. So what you're seeing here in this picture is sort of like this general scaffold with these like metal parts, and then it's got this sort of extruder thing on it. And basically what you can do is you can pour concrete or have this thing automatically pour concrete through basically like a hot glue gun, and then it sort of moves around and can deposit that concrete in layers over and over and over again to build up these structures. And using this method, you can make really low cost housing and you can build it really, really fast, where you can sort of build up the general structure of a house in like the order of like tens of hours, as opposed to like the several days or weeks or months it normally takes to build a house. And so this is really great because you can give people who would normally be homeless, because it's very expensive to have a house in some places, an ability to sort of sleep inside, which is like really great. And it really doesn't cost that much. So this is a really exciting sort of direction that 3D printing is going.
That's totally true. And before we advance that slide, Saul, a few years ago I did watch a documentary on this. And in the documentary itself, I don't have the source for it, unfortunately. They said they're able to 3D print these houses in about a day for about $3,000 or so in some cases.
Wow.
Is really economical, depending on, where they are and how they're printing it and such. So it does provide housing for people in need, which is really awesome.
Wow, yeah, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I'll touch base with you afterwards so I can watch that documentary. Yeah, so other uses of 3D printing are these like really crazy complex metal parts that are normally, you know, 10s or 20 parts separately that you can sort of combine into one part. And this might sound sort of like very trivial, but it turns out if you want to make something, every time you make a different part that that thing is made of, you have to have someone or something to sort of put it together. And so if you can take an assembly process that normally has 20 different parts and they're all these different shapes, you have to make all these different parts and then you have to get a person or a robot to put them all together, it gets very costly. But if instead you can redesign your part so you can just 3D print it out of metal all at once, and you can significantly reduce the cost of your part, and you can also in some cases make the part better than it ever could be, because 3D printing allows you to make shapes that you normally wouldn't be able to make with other sort of manufacturing methods. So this is an example of a nozzle made by the company General Electric, or GE, for the use in one of their, I want to say, jets or turbines. I believe it's a turbine jet. Anyways, the point is it used to be 20 different parts, and the engineers at GE were able to sort of redesign it and metal 3D print it so that it could just be one part, which significantly reduced the cost. Companies like Ford are also using metal 3D printing in order to make parts of their brakes. So brakes on cars get really, really hot often. And so by metal 3D printing them, unfortunately, I don't have the picture here, they're able to sort of create these different shapes so that the parts can sort of cool down much faster and still be very light. Sorry, do you have a question?
I was just going to note that there are also faculty members at CMU researching how to 3D print with metal, and they're in our materials science.
That is so true, yeah. In
College of
materials
Engineering.
and also in mechanical engineering. So some of my PhD student colleagues are working with these metal 3D printers. Very exciting work. These machines are really interesting. It's worth a Google after this. And so something near and dear to my heart is 3D printed low-cost prosthetic limbs. So on the left here, we have Robert Downey Jr. Fist bumping a child who he has just presented with a 3D printed prosthetic arm. And this guy was he was born with sort of a limb difference, and so part of his arm didn't develop after he was born, and so he uses a prosthetic in order to sort of have the use of two arms, and he was a really big Iron Man fan, and so with the help of an engineer at, I believe it was Florida State University, they designed this custom 3D printed prosthetic arm for him that sort of has this light up hand, and they had Robert Downey Jr. present it like in character. And so this is super exciting because you can make really inexpensive, on the order of like just a couple $100, 3D printed arms for people, when normally a prosthetic arm would cost on the order of like $5,000 to $6,000. And this is especially important for children because, as I'm sure you guys know, you grow out of your clothes and you grow out of your shoes like pretty quickly. And the same thing is true for children who use prosthetic limbs. And so to be able to have something that they love wearing, that they're proud of, that represents them, and that doesn't break the bank is really sort of a breakthrough. Because normally what some parents would have to do if they didn't have enough money was just wait, and just their child just wouldn't be able to have the use of two arms for a period of time. And now with this technology, they're able to sort of switch up their arms and sort of use it as an extension of themselves and express themselves, which I just think is so cool. And I got to sort of work in this space in my undergrad, which is really great.
It seems like our middle school participants, I really enjoyed that part too.
Yeah, it's so cool. It's an amazing development. It's worth the Google. There's lots of cool stuff about this online. Awesome. If you guys have questions at the end, I'd be happy to talk about this. I've done a lot of stuff in this, so we can chat. It would be cool. Okay. Another thing that people use 3D printing for is to 3D print body parts or to 3D print biological materials. And so here's a sort of a recent thing from Wake Forest University, where they printed this scaffold, sort of like the sort of like the framework of an ear, and then they sort of let cells, the cells that sort of like would fill in the scaffold to grow and then populate it and become an ear. And so in this way, this ear unfortunately was not ready enough to sort of be put on a person yet. But with this technology, the goal is to sort of be able to print the general architectures that are required for, at least to start with, simple organs like the ear, and then allow cells to sort of infiltrate the scaffold and then set up shop and start growing and doing their cell stuff and sort of becoming, instead of just a bunch of cells, they sort of change in a way to become the organ that's required, depending on the environment that they're in. And so here's an example of an ear. There's been work in 3D printing parts of hearts and lungs and muscle and neural tissues. So that's the stuff that your brain is made out of, and all sorts of different organs. It should be noted, to the best of my knowledge, there is no completely 3D printed organ that's been put in a person, but there's lots of people that are really actively trying to sort of push the technology forward so that when people need replacement organs, we can print one out for them or have one ready. So it's a very exciting direction in this field.
And so it looks like we've got a question in the chat. Do you want to talk a little bit about how the cells actually grow into that or grow in the structure?
Yeah, so cells are these just amazing little guys in that not only are they sort of carrying the genetic material that they need to do all their functions, but they're also sort of aware of their surroundings. And so this pink liquid sort of has cells in it and also has the like essentially nutrients that these cells need in order to survive. And so basically what happens is you introduce these cells into these environments and they sort of like crawl their way into the structure and can sort of set up shop because they're aware of like the mechanical or structural things in their environment. That's just one way of doing it. There's actually research happening here at CMU where instead of sort of printing a scaffold separately and then letting the cells sort of infiltrate in as part of their, as part of the cells sort of just moving around in their environment and then sort of integrating themselves into the scaffolds, you can print the cells alongside the scaffolds. And so you can sort of promote better sort of perfusion of the cells through the structures that you want them to sort of be throughout. I hope that answers the question that was asked. The chat is a little hard to keep track of while I am looking at, there's a lot of things going on my desktop. So please keep interrupting me so I can answer the questions. That's great. Cool. Okay, sounds like I did it and that the questions have been answered. So I will keep moving on. Another thing that people have used 3D printing for is to 3D print food. So on the left is the printing process of this company called Nova Meat, which is in Barcelona. And they're printing out this entirely vegetable-based or plant-based material that by sort of changing how it's deposited on this bed, they can sort of engineer the texture of this, what will then be meat. And so on the left is them actually printing this plant-based meat, and on the right is the meat after it's been like cooked and seasoned. And so there's a number of different companies that are doing this. There's a lot of sort of environmental and ethical concerns about sort of the growing and harvesting of meat for food. And so there's lots of really exciting companies that are using this bioprinting technique in order to like take plants and then sort of manipulate them in such a way that they can then be deposited with these 3D printers and still keep the same texture and taste as meat, but then have like almost none of the downsides in terms of environmental or ethical concerns. So this is a pretty exciting direction too. People are making like artificial meat without the use of 3D printers, and people are using chocolate. You can print chocolate with sort of the same kind of method, but I just thought the meat example was really cool. People use peanut butter as well. Yeah.
Saul, we had a question earlier that this is perfect time for. Have you ever tasted 3D printed food?
No, but if anybody has some, I'd love to. Man, there's so many cool things about 3D printing that I unfortunately have not had the opportunity to do, though. So I've never seen a 3D printed house. I've handled metal 3D printed parts. I've actually done some training on metal 3D printers, so I'm somewhat familiar with how they work. But I've never had any 3D printed meat, but I definitely would eat it. It looks pretty good. Cool. Okay. Other questions? Looks like I'm good to continue then. So another thing, and this is sort of a less popular thing, is some people, I think there's like at least one company doing it called Local Motors. They're trying to 3D print cars. This is honestly kind of a bad idea. We have pretty good ways of making cars already, and the sort of use case of trying to 3D print the cars that this company uses is that instead of having to sort of make a bunch of cars in one location and then ship them out to where they're going to be used, you could just have a bunch of different factories that can print your cars in a bunch of different locations. And then when you need a car, you can just print it. Some people think it's a good idea because they have quite a lot of funding, but it's a pretty exciting sort of development because it shows that not only can we make small things if we want to, we can also make much, much larger structures like things like cars and houses. But I sort of say that because just because you can 3D print it doesn't necessarily mean that you should 3D print it, which is sort of an important takeaway from this talk. I'm going to tell you a lot about all the cool things that you should 3D print, but that does not mean that it's always the answer. There's lots of ways of making things, and this is just one of them. It's a very cool.
I think that's definitely true, especially in this case. That seems just incredibly impractical.
Yeah, I agree. So I think actually the company sort of recognizes that. And so they pivot, and not only are their cars 3D printed, but they're also self-driving. So they get like multiple buzzwords in, and I think that just like the money just falls on them. So it seems to be working for now, but I don't know how long it'll last. So you could do all these really cool things, but you can also do lots of really silly things. So these are actually things that I have made. I designed them and I 3D printed them. You might recognize the green guy on the left. That's actually my head. I got a 3D scan of my head when I was in college because I've got some friends with some really expensive material or a really expensive 3D scanners or access to it rather. And so using 3D CAD or computer aided design software, I was able to take that scan of my head and then take an existing model of like this toy octopus. I actually have it right here, and I could put it on my head. And so I could give myself little octopus legs and then 3D print it out. And this is literally no use, but it was really fun to make. And yeah, it's just like a fun thing to have. And then I'm a big fan of this show, Avatar: The Last Airbender. And in that show, there's this really cool thing called a lion turtle. And the mascot of my undergraduate institution, the University of Maryland, is the terrapin. And so I had a 3D scan of this turtle. I had this cool thing, this 3D file of a lion, and I just sort of combined them and printed it out. So I do this with a lot of different animals. It's a ton of fun. It's just like a little hobby of mine. So yeah, I mean, 3D printing is great. It's got a lot of applications that are useful, but you can also do things that are not useful at all and just fun.
And tell me, for Halloween, you also utilize your 3D scan as well.
Yeah. Oh man. Oh,
do you happen to have that piece somewhere?
I should.
Close.
I definitely do. Just give me 2 seconds.
We'll be right back after these messages.
All right, I got it right here. Yeah, here it is. So big fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender. And so I took my 3D scan and then I took an arrow and I like sculpted it to my head and then I 3D printed it out. So this is the best way to do it is you do it sideways and then you see it full on. So this like perfectly conforms to my skull. And so even though it's just a piece of plastic, I can like move my head and like turn, right? And it fits because it's like perfectly shaped to my head. So yeah, 3D printing.
I think that's pretty cool.
It allows you to do a lot of really useful things. And again, you can do really silly things and it's not so hard, which is really good. I got a 3D printer in my apartment. I love it. Okay. Cool, okay. So that's sort of that was a whirlwind. We talked about a lot of things. The next stage of this, we're going to talk about sort of how 3D printers use how plastic 3D printers work, specifically the ones that I use to make this and this, and the things on screen. But before that, if people have questions about the other stuff, now's a good time, because this is sort of like a transitional period. If not, we could just hop on through and then move on.
So I don't see any questions in the chat right now.
Okay, well then let's plug on. So yeah, a good question that you guys might be thinking about is like, okay, great, you showed me all this stuff. I'm amazed, hopefully, maybe not, I don't know. You're at least interested. How do these printers print plastic, right? And so this wonderful guy I showed you over here, it's a layer by layer process. So here you're seeing it go forward, and then you're about to see it go in reverse. And basically what's going on is that this printer deposits a layer of material, a layer of plastic, from essentially like a hot glue gun that's really, really fancy. And then,
Hey, what?
Go ahead.
I was going to ask, what's that pattern in the middle?
Oh, that pattern in the middle is called infill. So basically, you have the outside of your part, and you definitely want that to be really smooth and solid, because that's the part that people are going to see. But on the inside, do you need the whole thing to be full? This should have been a poll. That's okay. Do you need the whole thing to be full? What happens if only 10%
Well, we'll
of
ask.
it is full? Yeah, let's ask it as a poll.
So instead of a poll, you can answer by saying yes or no.
Okay, so let's do it a binary. Do you think it needs to be 100% full? Or do you think if it's like 10% full or 50% full or 25% full, like that's okay, depending on what you want to use it for? So I guess yes for 100% full, or go home. This model wouldn't work. I don't believe you saw. Or no, a lower percentage than 100% might be okay.
So we have some no's coming in right now.
Ooh, depends on its purpose. That's a great researcher answer. That's like if you ask a professor a question, that is every answer, is it depends. And it's a good answer, because it always does depend. Yeah, so I'm seeing a lot of no's, which is cool to see. That's totally right. You don't need it to be full. But actually I take it back. Mustafa's answer was really great, because it depends on its purpose. In general, you're probably fine with like 10 to 20%, especially if it's something that is just like a toy, where really all you care about is the outside. But if you want it to be really stiff, then you might want to increase the infill so that there's sort of more material to take the loads that are going to be applied to the structure. But that's something that you can tune really easily. It's just like it's a number that you can type in, and the software that you use to take your 3D models and then turn them into something that you can print makes it very easy for you to change. Yeah.
Just so you know, the 3D printed parts that you all have today, they were printed with 20% infill.
Yep.
Fun fact.
So this happens sort of on this 3D printer, right? This is the 3D printer that was used to, this is the same kind of 3D printer that was used to print these structures. Kristen did us a great service and printed out all these things for you guys. Hold up, what's my next slide looks weird. Okay, great. So, but what's actually going on, right? So we see that we're depositing a layer, like layers and layers and layers on top of each other, but like, what does that look like? Can you zoom in for me? Yes, I can zoom in for you. So this is a lovely demonstration from this company called Solid Concepts, where they actually have 2 nozzles extruding different materials. But basically what you have is a very, very thin amount of material being put down on a surface. And then you sort of do that again and again and again, but instead of just depositing on a surface, you deposit on the layer that you just printed. And so if you do this, go ahead.
So Saul, I had a question. So I have the piece of black 3D printer filament, and everybody should have this piece as well. So when this filament is extruded, is it going to be the same width that it is?
Yeah, that's a great
Just
question.
like push it out and smush it down?
Great question. No, it's actually, it gets much smaller. So when it comes in, right now the filament that you might be holding in your hands, the black filament, is 1.75 millimeters in diameter. And when you put it through an extruder, at least the one on my printer, and it's very common for a lot of printers of this kind, it comes out and its diameter is 0.4 millimeters, right? So we went all the way from 1.75 down to 0.4. So it squishes it down and it also heats it up in the process. So while what you have in your hand is like sort of pretty rigid, when you heat it up, it gets really, really soft. And so that way you can sort of push it out. And that's sort of why I use the hot glue gun analogy, because it's the same sort of idea. It starts rigid, you heat it up and it gets really like flowy. And then it comes out, cools down, and then solidifies again. Ooh, I see a question. Why is the black stiff but the orange is fluffy?
So I'm gonna hold questions on that one.
Yeah, that's a...
Think about that, because you all are going to be talking about that in your breakout sessions.
Yep. Okay. So we got another poll coming up. This poll is, so we're gonna start transitioning and talk about, we talked about using 3D printing for a bunch of different applications, but one thing we didn't talk about is for robots. And that's sort of some of the research that I've been up to these days.
Oh no, we don't have a.
Oh no, sorry. Here we go. Should pop up. We don't have this as a poll.
We don't have this as a poll.
Oh, that's on me. Sorry, guys. Well,
it can be short answer if you put your answer
yeah,
in the
have a
chat.
definition for a robot. What do you guys think a robot is? Is it a dance, right? Is it like when you're like, robot, and you like, it's like really jerky? I mean, that technically is the robot, but what is a robot? Like a robot senses, plans, and acts. It's a dance, a machine. Yeah, cool. It does something. So here's a really good question, and this is kind of funny. So I'm asking this to you guys, right? But this is a question that happens in all of my robotics classes, where we show up and we're like, what is a robot? And like, what isn't a robot? And no one has a really good answer, but a sort of a general definition, a general answer that a lot of people seem to be sufficient with is that it's something. Ooh, I definitely had this written down. Oh boy. It's a system that is able to sense its environment and then sort of make decisions about what it's going to do next in a at least somewhat autonomous, which just means that without like human input at the same time, somewhat autonomous way, right? So in general, like a fully fledged robot should be able to sense its environment, process information about its environment, make decisions about what it wants to do, and then act in such a way to sort of change its environment or change how it is in the environment. Yeah, so a lot of these definitions that I'm seeing reflect that. So great job, you guys. You totally know what robots are. Nice. Okay, so something about robots is that they tend to be quite expensive, right? So a project that I was working on was how can we use 3D printing to develop an ultra low cost 3D printed robot? And so that's what we see here. This little scale bar over here is in millimeters. So this whole structure is on the order of like, how big is it? It's like 40 or 50. It's on the order of like 80 millimeters long. And it costs only like 89 cents without the actuators that drive it. The actuators themselves are quite expensive. Each one is $70. Oopsie. But we couldn't find a cheaper one. But everything else is added up together.
So what is an actuator?
Great question. An actuator is basically a general term for a motor. So it's a thing that makes things move. So you can have a linear actuator, which is something that makes things move like in a line, right? You can also have like a motor or like a rotational actuator, which basically like turn things in a circle. And these guys are linear actuators, which I'll show you in a second how they work on this machine. But first I want to talk to you about how this sort of robot is going to walk and why we sort of looked into it in the first place. So the whole idea is to have this low cost, 3D printable folding robot. Because right now, if you want to make a robot, oftentimes it's really expensive to sort of make all the different components that come together to form the robot, both to make those individual components and as well as put them all together. And there's a number of different applications in terms of like education and maybe like exploring dangerous or precarious areas where if you deploy your robot, you're not sure if it's going to come back. So maybe like a collapsed building or something like that, where you kind of want your robot to be inexpensive. So if it doesn't come back, it's not so big of a deal. And so what we were looking at is, can we design a structure in such a way where we can change the way that it walks just based on its geometry? So there's a couple of like length parameters or sort of lengths of key things on this robot looking from the top, that if we change them, it sort of changes how they end up walking when they're sort of expanded and contracted. And so we did lots of computer modeling on this, and we 3D printed it out. And to see how it worked, we actually sort of printed it out and we put some actuators on it. So here are the actuators expanding and contracting. So you can sort of see almost like a piston. These linear actuators I showed you before are sort of coming out and coming back in. And what they allow this robot to do is sort of walk. On its back, it's carrying something called a breadboard, which has a battery and a little microcontroller taped to it that sort of allows it to locomote. And this whole sort of system of just like the robot itself without the actuators and the breadboard is only like 89 cents. It's a very, very inexpensive thing. And it was able to walk, which was really great. Not very fast, but it was able to walk. And as a first pass, that's pretty cool. I see a question, something that, what does L1, L2, and L3 mean? Yeah, so the thing I showed you before, those were just the names that I gave to the dimensions of the structure, right? So the distance between this line and this line, well, I just called L3. And then the distance between this area and this area, I called L1. And then this height, the distance between here and here, I just called L2. So that's something you often do. Yeah, cool. I'm glad that answered your question. Okay.
So this is your research. Were you able to pick this topic?
Kind of, yeah. So when I interviewed with Vicky, she told me about a number of different projects that were going on in the lab, and this was one of them. And I said, oh, wow, I'm really excited about this project. This is really cool. And so I joined the lab to work on this project, but the sort of exact direction or what the robot would look like, I had a lot of say in that as a graduate student, which was really cool. So I sort of designed this structure, sort of the general shape of this robot with collaborators at another university, at Case Western Reserve University. So yeah, I did get to choose.
All right.
All right, so we saw the video. So I showed you the robot, I showed you it walking. We've been talking about how things are made with this 3D printing. So how does this thing get made? Well, it's using this integrative 3D printing method, this FDM, which is just the name of the technique, 3D printing method. And basically what that means is that all the different components are put inside of the robot while it's being printed. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay, so if we look at the build tray, right, the thing that the printer prints on, first it's going to print out this white structure. And once it's done that, what we want to do is we insert these magnets inside of the body of the robot, because we're going to print it flat and then we're going to fold it so that it takes its final form. We do that because it turns out if you print something flat, it tends to print a little bit faster than if you print it sort of not flat. And so with this method, we're able to print out this base structure that can hold magnets. Then we print directly on top of our magnets to capture the magnets. So now we don't have any screws or nuts, and now we've been able to print magnets or print a structure and then put magnets and then print over them. So now the magnets are sort of part of the structure and they don't come loose. After this process, we sort of insert another set of magnets and print directly over them. And now you'll notice that we have some pillars, and it's on these pillars that we're going to insert our linear actuators. So these are the guys that sort of expand and contract to make our robot walk once it's totally folded. And to keep the actuators in place, we print on top of these posts. So now there's this little cap to them, so the actuators can't come loose. And so with this method, we're able to print all of the different sort of critical components for the main body of this robot without any screws or zip ties or anything like that, just by sort of printing the components and adding, or printing a main structure and then adding the components and then printing on top of those components. Okay.
So how do you tell the printer to stop printing? You're in the midst of your print. You need to insert your magnets.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. So when you're printing, the process is you have this 3D file, and then you put it into a software called the slicer that basically takes that file and turns it into the bunch of layers that we saw sort of scrolling up on that green version of my head. And when it does that, it turns that description of your part in terms of slices into something called machine code. And so you can insert other things into that machine code, rather into that G code, to tell it to do other things like beep at a certain point, or to pause to allow you to insert components. So while I'm slicing it, I can just tell the printer, hey, I want you to pause at this specific layer for, you know, until I click a button on the printer, and then you can resume printing. And that sort of allows me to add parts to the printer while it's printing, or before it's done the whole print, I should say. Cool. Okay. So we've got this flat structure. We've got a bunch of magnets inside of it. And then we also have captured our linear actuators in it. And so then what we do is we take it out, and we can just flip up the legs into their final configuration, right? So normally assembly is a much more complicated process. And granted, this is a pretty simple structure. But the sort of proof of concept here is that you can have sort of a flat origami almost structure. And then just by a very simple mechanism of flipping up the legs, the magnets cause it to take its final form. And then because the structure doesn't weigh that much, they're actually strong enough to hold it in its final form. So this is like the assembly of the robot after it's sort of been fabricated.
And does your robot have a name?
Yeah, the name of this robot is called a Metabot. And the reason it's called a Metabot is way back on that previous slide, which I will show you right here. This behavior of this structure, where we sort of expand it outwards, we have applied this tension, and it causes these guys to rotate, is sort of weird. Normally when you pull on things, they get thinner in the middle and they don't rotate, right? But when we pull on this structure, the middle part actually rotates. And so whenever you have a behavior of some sort of object, a continuous sort of mechanical object, and it behaves sort of differently than what you normally would expect, you can call that a metastructure. And so this is called a Metabot because it has this sort of metastructure that sort of dictates its behavior. And so that's where meta comes from. And bot because it's a robot. So it's a Metabot.
And once, say, all the research has been completed and these Metabots are out in the world, what then will they do?
Yeah, so from the video, you can sort of see that these guys don't walk super fast. So the hopes of them trying to go into broken down buildings so they can sort of like survey stuff are sort of, they're rather high hopes. So something that I hope for this project in the future is that it can be used as like an educational tool, because the shape of the robot and how it walks is sort of dependent on how the robot walks is really dependent on its shape. And so we can use this as like an educational tool to sort of explain these different engineering concepts of like design influencing function and trade-offs between expense and the materials that you can use and the kind of performance you can get. So yeah, the sort of future of this robot is like as an educational tool to talk about different things within engineering.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool. All right. So
Thanks for telling us about the Metabot.
Yeah, my pleasure. So now we're going to dive into a lab tour. Yes, we have sea slugs in an aquarium facility in a different part of the building. That is true. We do, and they're really cool. We use sea slugs as part of, Vicky, if you want to talk more about that, I don't want to say something that's wrong because I don't work directly with the slugs.
I was just responding to a question. Are there any animals in the lab?
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yep. Yeah, we study sea slugs as a model for soft-bodied robots. As well as we use them in some neuroscience research and in our biohybrid robot research.
Yeah. Okay. So, hold up 1 second. All right, so we did our wonderful tour of the lab. And so now we're gonna dive into our 3D printing activity. This is the really fun part. So if you weren't having fun, you're gonna get to use a catapult and it's gonna be baller. So this 3D printing activity, you should locate your catapult. We're gonna break out. I got the 5-minute break right after this. So maybe the 5-minute break is the time where people find all their materials. I'll let you take that.
Yep. Okay. So we're going to have a 5-minute break here. And then once we come back from our break, we're going to go into our breakout sessions. The sessions will be led by our mentors. So during our break, go ahead, stand up, stretch for a minute, do what you need to do, and then come back in about 5 minutes. Make sure you gather up all your materials that were sent to you. So again, you'll need your 3D printed base that's on the slide here. You'll need your 2 filament samples, the black one and the orange one. And you will need your 3 catapult arms. And then we have some cotton balls and some craft palms as well that you will need. And then to follow along with the activities, there's the sheet that was on the Canvas website. So you can follow along with that. You can take notes in a notebook, or if you printed it out, you can use it that way as well. So Saul, if you want to talk a little bit about the sort of the meat of the activity before we go into our break.
Yeah, absolutely. So the meat of the activity is that we've got these catapults, where we got one catapult with 3 different arms. And what we're going to do is launch the same kinds of projectiles with the different arms and see if the arms throw the projectiles differently. And if they do, try to come up with the reasons why that might be, right? Is it the shape of the arm? Is it the color of the arm? Is it the projectile? So we're trying to figure out like what's going on with if we see a difference in how far these projectiles are thrown by the different arms, and keeping it very vague because I want you guys to sort of come up with answers yourselves and sort of make, think critically about this and try to come up with the reasons that you think make sense.
Yeah. And also, just so that you all know, the 3D printed base that you all have and the basic design was from a catapult that was on a site called thingiverse.com. It's where you can find all kinds of STL files, which are 3D files that you can use for 3D printing. So you'll see that the arms are a little bit different for each arm. They're also labeled A, B, and C in this case. So Saul was talking about the differences and why those matter. So you'll find out all about those differences and what they can potentially mean. So right now on my clock, I have 5:30. So we're going to go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So Saul, if you want to put that slide on, we will sort of reconvene in about 5 minutes from now, and then we will go into our breakout rooms. See you in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the breakout sessions. I hope you learned a little bit more about 3D printing. So right now, we are going to be answering some of our questions and sharing some of our results. Saul, if you want to advance the next slide, please. So we'd like to ask you, which arms work the best? Does anybody want to answer in the chat? So we have an answer of C. So C is also the black arm. B is the blue arm. A is the pink arm. We've got some varying results here. Okay, but we have a poll for this one. We're gonna find out in just a minute. Okay, so we'll get back to that answer in just a minute. So keep that in mind. But one of our polls here. What material is better for printing, for 3D printing a stiff object like a mug handle? Is it going to be the PLA, which was the black strand, or the TPU, the orange strand? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end my polling now and share the results. It looks like this one is unanimous. And Saul, what would you say?
Yeah, I would totally agree. I would say that if you want a stiffer object, you should use the PLA material. Ooh, I'm trying to get my video up. Yeah, you should use the PLA material because that way you can, the PLA material is stiffer. And so when you print with it, you get stiffer objects.
Right.
Awesome. And I think, sorry, I might have missed the poll for the last one. If it seems like if we just jump back for a second, we can sort of talk about which arms work best and why we think.
Yeah. So we do.
Oh, it's just the next one.
You have a poll for that one. We're just sort of out of order right now.
Here we go. Okay, here it is. Whoopsie. Cool.
Here we go. I forgot that we had this poll. So which catapult arm launched the projectiles the furthest? Was it the pink arm, the blue arm, or the black arm? So A, B, or C. Give it a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna go and share those results. And it is RC. So, friends, why do you think that C worked the best? And why do you think the arms worked a little bit differently? Would anyone like to share? Maybe turn on your camera and share.
Kristen, it looks like Allison is raising her hand to share.
Yeah, Allison, would you like to share?
Oh, I can't unmute. That's okay. You can also throw your answer in chat.
Okay, so she should be able to unmute now.
Sorry,
There you
I
go.
don't know what's wrong. I think maybe like if where I picked pink catapult, like maybe if it doesn't have any weight at the front or the back, it has less stuff pulling it down, like less stuff pulling it down, so it's probably gonna make the stuff go farther. But it, like people said, like if the like the size and shape and like that changes how like maybe the projectiles fire.
Okay. Do we have any other answers? Any other thoughts about that? Raise your hand if you would like to share. We have some in the chat. So more mass equals more force. Oh, how about Saul?
Yeah, so what you might notice is that when you bend these guys, even if they're not inside of the catapult, that some of them are stiffer than other ones, right? And so you can think of things that bend and that return to their shape as springs. Like even if they're not in like the classical sort of like helical, like springy shape, if you can bend and then return back to your shape, you can actually store energy when you are bent and then release that energy in the action of returning to your original shape. And so as it happens, the stiffness of your spring is related to the amount of energy you can store. And basically what that means is when we bend the arms the same amount, the ones that are stiffer store more energy for the same amount of being bent. And which means that when we let them return to their original state, they can release more energy. And so we can turn that sort of deformational energy that's stored in the spring into kinetic energy that's put into the projectile. And so by storing more energy in the stiffer ones, by bending them, we can throw the projectiles further. Something you guys also might have noticed that the projectiles themselves fly differently from each other. I saw someone mention air resistance earlier. Does anybody have any reasons why they think that the different projectiles, the pom-poms or the cotton balls are flying different amounts, or if they did fly different amounts for you? I see someone said gravity. Okay. Is gravity going to favor one of them over the other? More surface area, size, and density. Which one, the pom-pom or the cotton ball, do you think that those things, surface area, size, density, makes things go further? Someone said the cotton balls have more drag. That's a good point, right? So if the drag is something that objects moving in a fluid like air experience. So when you move through the air on your bike, or if you stick your hand out of the window when you're in the car, you can feel a force on you that's sort of resisting you moving through the fluid. And so things that are bigger experience more drag. Someone said if the cotton balls were not wet, they would have better airflow, so less drag. That's potentially true, yeah. The blue pom-pom hit the cotton ball for blue pom-pom. I'm not sure what that comment means in particular, but in general, if you have a smaller, denser object that's more sort of spherical, it's going to have less drag and go further. And so the pom-poms are really light and airy, and if you take the cotton balls are even more light and airy, and so the cotton balls experience more drag, and so they tend to fly less far. But if you actually wet them and you compact them down, you can make them fly a little bit further because you can give them a little bit more density by sort of compacting their volume or compacting their mass in a smaller volume, and then they fly better because they experience a little less drag.
Okay.
Cool.
Does that answer everyone's questions about the printed materials and the catapults specifically? So here's one final poll that we have if no one else has any questions.
Kristen, I am seeing a question that just came in chat. Did the colors have anything to do with have to do with anything, or were they just for identification?
Those were just for identification. They're all made out of the PLA material. So I'm going to go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Kristen, sorry.
So I launched the poll. Were you going to say something else, Saul?
No, I was going to say exactly what you're about to say, so you're good.
Okay. So how much do you think that it costs to print out the catapult arm, the catapult base, and the 3 arms today?
Kristen, is this question for one person or for everybody?
I believe
this is for one person, yeah. So this would be the catapult base and then 3 arms. How much do you think that costs?
And for those of you who can't see the poll, the options are A, 50 cents, B, $5, C, $50, and D, $500.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and end polling now and share the results.
Awesome. So it looks like a lot of you picked A, 50 cents, and that is the correct answer. So the cost of materials to make small PLA parts is very, very, very low, right? So just like the Metabot is like, it's right over here for scale, right? So here's the catapult and here's the Metabot. I'll use my face as a background, I guess. For these very small parts, you can make them very, very inexpensively because it's just the cost of the material, and the material doesn't cost that much. It's about like on the order of $20 to $25 for a kilogram, which is like 2.2 pounds ish. So yeah, it's incredibly cheap. Now this is not true for all the different kinds of 3D printing. Metal 3D printing in particular is very expensive. So the metal 3D printer that I used to work with, the base cost of just putting anything on the printer was $400 because that's the cost of the build tray, and you had to like do stuff to the build tray after you were done with it. It wasn't like super reusable. And so yeah, 3D prints can cost anywhere between, you know, the 50 cents that we're using today all the way up to tens of thousands of dollars, or I'm sure even more than that, depending on the size of what you want to print. But yeah, the most expensive print that I am aware of that I've like personally been involved with was on the order of like, I think $10,000. Yeah. So
Far more expensive than our 50-cent catapults
absolutely.
today.
Alrighty. So
Does anybody have one last question or one last comment or remark? Feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to share.
someone made a fun joke of why didn't I get a $50,000 catapult? I would ask the same thing. Why don't I have a $50,000 catapult? I'd want one.
So the catapults are made out of PLA, which is the black kind. The TPU is orange. That's the orange filament. Well, so I think we're just about ready to wrap up here. So I'd like to give a big round of applause for Saul today. So thank you very much, Saul, for presenting today and sharing your 3D printing research with us. I hope our participants in middle school today enjoyed the activity. Yeah, and thanks everyone for participating. Thank you, mentors, and thank you, Dr. Webster-Wood. We hope to see you again next time.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
So we'll see you, everyone.
Thank you. Have a nice day, or end of your day, I guess.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.